Welcome to the Create Your Happy podcast, where conscious female creators come together with a shared vision to inspire and empower women as they learn how to fully embrace their humanness, find their unique voice, and collaborate on how together we can change the world. I'm your host, Christy Holt, happiness coach and conscious funpreneur on a mission to change the world one beautiful soul at a time. All right, gorgeous, it's time to get curious and become inspired. It's time to create your happy. Welcome to this week's episode of Create Your Happy podcast. I'm your host, Christy Holt, happiness hussy extraordinaire. And with me today, I have the lovely Kelly Bramblett. And Kelly is a trauma support coach. I mean, she's much, much more than that. But I'm going to let Kelly introduce herself a little bit and share a little bit about her journey and a little insight into the work that she does. So welcome to the show, Kelly. I would love to invite you to share a little bit about yourself.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. So yes, as you mentioned, I am a trauma support coach. I also do law of attraction and shadow work coaching, and those two are kind of combined, which is you don't hear often about those two things being worked with together. But I do combine those things together in my coaching, all these different elements in my coaching. I'm also a self-help author, a Reiki master teacher, just to name a few things. And I have like a bunch of other little certifications thrown in there that I use in my coaching as well, like EFT Practitioner and fun stuff like that, mainly things that I use within my coaching. So I don't really advertise or market for those things necessarily.
Yeah, it's fun because we can have all of these different modalities that kind of come together and then tailor them to the specific coaching scenario, right? So not all modalities are going to be necessary for every single client. And it's nice to have sort of a toolbox, a bunch of resources to pull from to really help that client with that particular need, whatever they've got going on right now.
Absolutely, yes. But I would say my main work is definitely focused around the trauma recovery work, which is very near and dear to my heart. Having experienced my own trauma and healed from that, many, many years of healing, having gone from feeling completely hopeless at one point, I am extremely passionate about helping other women see what is possible, see what else is possible from that vantage point of hopelessness or just being overwhelmed with your experience, your past painful experiences. So trauma recovery work is definitely where my heart is. And all of three of my books have incorporated the trauma recovery stuff in them as well.
Yeah, I mean, we're whole humans, and so the sooner we can come to this understanding and recognition that we are whole and that we have all of these pieces, we're not the only ones, right? I think so many of us think that we're the only ones that have had this experience or feel this way or are struggling with this thing, and the truth is you're never alone. Your experience may be somewhat unique to you in some ways, but there is always someone else who has been there, has had those thoughts. Like we are all connected. And so the sooner we can kind of put those pieces together, the better. Now you mentioned that there's a sort of a personal reason behind this. I would love for you to share, maybe a little bit more about your story so that we can really get to know Kelly and why this is such an important piece of your coaching.
Yeah, absolutely. So I always like to offer a trigger warning here. My story does have elements of sexual abuse. So I just always like to offer like an appropriate trigger warning before I get into my story because it can be triggering for some people who have similar experiences. But my story really starts so many years ago, 20 plus years ago or more, 30 something years ago when the actual abuse happened. And just going way back when I was a kid, I was raised in a very rigid religious home. And one of the worst things I think my parents or my dad, my mom has luckily enough grown through this, but my dad's still kind of there, could have imagined is for me to be with another woman or girl at the time, because I was only 15 when I discovered this about myself and started understanding I was interested in women. And I was dating a young girl my same age. We were both around 15. And I had written about it in a journal, which my mom read. And when she read the journal, she told my dad what it said. And from there was an absolute freak out in the home. They thought my soul was in danger, my life was in danger, I'm going down a bad path. And so they thought the best thing would be to have me drop out of school at that time, separate me from every single person that I knew, including the girl that I was dating at the time, who, I was very much in love with, as you are when you're that age of 15. It's that young love. It was one of my first experiences kind of exploring my sexuality with a woman in that way, or a girl. I keep saying woman because I'm a woman now, but we were very much girls. And it was really upsetting. So they separated me from everyone and they sent me to live with my aunt and her husband, who were even more fanatical than my father had become at this time. And it wasn't a mainstream religion. It wasn't like Methodist, Catholic, or Baptist or anything like that. They most closely identified with what is called Christian identity movement. And I don't know how many people are familiar with this, but it's really steeped in a lot of racism and anti-Semitic belief system. So there was a lot of racism. Like when I got to the home, obviously, like they received magazines all the time about white supremacy stuff and building your own weapons and, all of this really hateful information about Jewish people specifically, but they were pretty much racist against everybody. And they also had a really strange belief system that was based solely on the Old Testament, which are some really, like, if you're familiar, those Old Testament laws can be pretty rigid and insane. And so there was a belief system and multiple wives that was happening there. And so when I first got there, the grooming process was already happening, long story short, from quote unquote my uncle, though we're not blood related. So it started out with violent threats. If we catch you talking to anyone, I will tie you up and beat you outside. My father had already tied me up once and beat me. So there was nothing inside of me that didn't believe this could actually happen. And so it started with that. And then as things went on, that narrative changed to, I'm the only person that loves you. Your parents don't even love you. If they did, they wouldn't have sent you here. So it was all very calculated, basically, to start with fear and then to move into placing me in a mental position where I'd be dependent on this one person, basically, for everything. And keep in mind, I'm only 15.
A child.
This is happening. Yeah. And so I was there for about a year. And by the time I left, I was completely and utterly brainwashed. I was preparing to be a second wife. I was being told things like, I need to get your aunt pregnant first, and then she'll be okay. He was talking about getting legal guardianship of me so that my parents, when they found out, wouldn't be able to come in and take me away. And I was just, like, as I said, completely brainwashed. Like, I followed this man around and worshiped him. I would sit at his feet like a dog, wherever he was at in the house, literally. And, I washed his feet. Along with this, it was like the man is the ruler of the house, and almost like you worship the man of the house, and very subservient, attitude towards women. Which I adopted because that's what I was being taught. And at this point, it was just so chaotic, so scary, so unnerving that it was really easy, I feel like, in hindsight, for him to get me to this place a year later. And it all came out eventually when one night my aunt was crying and she had caught us once. And there was sexual abuse, there was rape. I was definitely raped when I was unconscious. One time I woke up and just saw the quick image of it, because in addition to all the psychological damage that was being done, he was also giving me alcohol and pills every night because that lowered my inhibitions. So every night it was our ritual, I guess you could say, all three of us, him, my aunt, and myself, to sit around after dinner. We would take shots of whiskey, and he started giving me muscle relaxers and other pills. So I was really out of it a lot of times. So there was this whole other element of drug use and alcohol use that was being introduced to me. That was also lowering my inhibitions and causing all kinds of havoc. And so The rape actually occurred on one of these nights, and I talk about it in my book, when I had been really, really sick. And I guess he had got me from the bathroom, moved me into the bedroom, and I was unconscious. But I just remember waking up and there was like double mirrors and seeing him on top of me and then realizing that he was inside of me, basically. And he was a giant man. He was like 350 pounds, huge. And that's all I remember. It was just this one flash, but I knew it had happened. But he had kind of taught me that as long as we didn't have intercourse, it wasn't a sin because we weren't yet married. So there was a lot of oral stuff that was happening. And up until the day he died, he never admitted that the rape happened. And for a long time, I questioned myself. But I know now, all these years later, without a doubt, what I saw and what had happened. And so all of this came out one night when my aunt was crying, and we were actually moving states. So she and I were in one state and he was in another state, and we were like finishing packing up because he had to start his job. And I told her everything that had been happening. And like I said, she had found out, she had caught us once. And then I guess he said it will never happen again, or whatever he was doing. I don't know, because she was also manipulated just as much. Yeah. When he first got with my aunt, she was only 18 years old herself, and he was 56 when I was 15. So he was well in his 40s when they had first gotten together. So this was obviously a pattern and a habit. And she herself was just as brainwashed after all these years with him as I was in that short time with him, basically. And when she found out, she called my parents and told them, because up until this, like when the violence was being threatened, I would tell my parents, like, he's saying he's going to do this, he's going to do that. And he would just get on the phone right after me and say, she's just trying to manipulate you to come home. You can't believe anything she said. So at this point, my parents didn't believe anything I said anyway, so it didn't really matter. So I kind of gave up, right?
Yeah.
And just kind of surrendered to the experience, because in my mind, it was the safest thing for me to do. And this way, my life wasn't completely miserable, right?
Yeah.
Because the more that I pleased him, the easier my life became, basically. So when my parents found out, they convinced my aunt to pack us up, my cousin, who was only 2 at the time, myself and her, and we went home to my parents' house, and the shit kind of hit the fan, you could say, at this point. And basically, as time went on, it was something that wasn't ever dealt with. My family never really dealt with it. We didn't really talk about it. I mean, really up until even my 30s and entering into my 40s when I wrote my book, we were not talking about this huge major thing that had happened to me as a child. It was just kind of brushed under the rug, and I never really received help. And it basically sent me on what I call the downward spiral of destructive living and unhealed wounding. And from there, I eventually became addicted to drugs, addicted to alcohol. I had 3 children in the mix of all this, who now were also brought into this chaos that was my life at the time. And this spiral continued for a very long time. And along with this, because of all of this damage, all of these ideas that I had, I continued to participate and attract more abusive relationships that all had an element of sexual abuse, physical abuse, rape, all of these things. It was almost like I was punishing myself for some reason through partners over and over again. So in addition to the original abuse that had happened, then it was compounded with relationship after relationship and some of this abuse. And I don't like to go into detail because it is so triggering for some, I'm sure, but it was very intense abuse. It was very, very intense abuse, and it definitely took a toll on me in every way. And finally, around 2016, when I had had enough, and all of these years, it was like what I call a 2-step forward, 1 step backwards. I knew I was unhappy. I just didn't know what to do. And so I was like, well, obviously my drinking is the problem. I have a raging drinking problem. So I'd focus on the drinking. I'd go to my AA meetings. I would do well for a while. Things would start to improve. But sure enough, something would happen and I would end up drinking and fall back. Now I understand that's because I was never addressing the root issues. I was only addressing the symptoms of the wounding. So it was impossible for me to sustain that because there were still those wounded pieces in me that were wanting to numb, wanting to hide, wanting to avoid. And because I wasn't dealing with that and didn't have the tools to deal with that, I would always end up reverting back. So fast forward to 2016 when I was in yet another highly abusive relationship. He was, I don't know at the time, off drinking, doing whatever. And I was finally by myself and I was just sitting and I was journaling and I was writing affirmations and I was kind of just desperate for relief, basically, of everything. And I was allowing these affirmations to flow onto the page and across the page without me willing it. The words, "I deserve to be happy," showed up. And it still gets me a little emotional because when I saw those words that didn't even seem like they came from me, because in my head, I did not feel deserving of happiness. When I saw those words, it like hit me in the chest, in the heart space. And I literally fell to the ground and I started sobbing and making this guttural sound that didn't even sound human. It was so many years of release and this truth that had finally found me somehow. This truth and understanding that despite all these things that I was, sorry, I do get really emotional, but that I was worthy of happiness. And all of these years I had lived believing differently were a lie. So I at least had this truth that I felt on a soul level. And I still didn't have the tools and I had no idea what I was going to do, but I made a commitment and I said, this is enough. I deserve better. My kids deserve better. And I committed to figuring out, finding out whatever I needed to begin to heal my life. And I set upon this mission and I've not looked back since. And so I got out of that toxic relationship and started learning. And that's really what put me on the path that got me to where I am today. It was one baby step at a time, one piece of healing at the time. And there's still things that I have to heal around all of these things. I don't know personally if the healing journey ends. I think we just heal a little more deeply and a little more deeply as we go on.
Like
but that onion. Yeah, exactly.
Another layer, always another layer, another level of unfolding, right? Something else that comes to our awareness that we can take a look at and figure out what it's there to tell us. And in all of those opportunity, as horrible as so many, circumstances and experiences are, they do contain often with them a gift within them. Yeah. And it's really fucking hard to see it when you're in it, right? So, for anybody who's in a difficult situation, we see you, we recognize, that you didn't choose to be there. It's not your fault that you're in that situation, but you do have the power to change it. That I think is the underlying message here, is that you are the one who has the ability to make a change.
And the only one that can. And that's the truth, because what I learned through this 30 years of toxic living is you can replace the relationship, you can even replace the habit. But if you don't heal the stuff, guess what? Someone steps right into that place and they have the same characteristics, the same behavior. Maybe you get rid of one habit and then you start, leaning onto food or gambling or sex or whatever that is. But there's always something that steps right into that position unless you do that deeper healing work. So 100% yes, that is true, but we are the only ones that can change it. Changing our external situation can help if you're doing all the other work, but if you're not doing all the other work, you will just find yourself repeating the same cycles, the same patterns, and the same habits, which is exactly what I was doing all those years until finally I broke those cycles and broke those habits so that I could get some space to actually grow and experience joy for the first time in literally my entire life, it seems like. So,
well, I think it's interesting because the real rub is we don't know what we don't know. So those things that are lying below our awareness are often playing out in our life. And we're like, what the fuck is this? Why am I seeing these patterns, these habits repeating? I want to change, and I just keep ending right back up here in the same old shitty situation. And the truth of that is that even if your mind can forget, your body remembers. And so that trauma is stored in your body, in your nervous system. And so while you may cognitively be like, what the fuck, this is not what I'm calling into my life, this is not what I want, and yet you're still experiencing, I'll say, like, outcomes that seem to be repeating as if on autopilot, right? And the truth is that when you see them, then you have a little bit more power. And how do we see them? Well, we got to look that shit dead in the eye. And what a lot of us do is we get real fucking uncomfortable with looking that shit in the eye because it's terrible. It's horrible. It didn't feel good. It left us marred emotionally in some way. So of course we want to avoid that. You know what I mean? Like when Gabor Mate talks about addiction, he talks so much about, of course, people just want comfort. They want to feel okay. And a big part of returning to these patterns is this call to feeling safe. And it's not about safety at all. It's actually about comfort and familiarity. And so of course we end up, finding those horrible circumstances are all we know, right? And we find that feels like home. So we find drawn to those sort of situations until we shift our thinking, shift our perspective, really take a look at, okay, there's some things coming up here that I'm not digging, and I don't want them to keep coming up, but they keep coming up, and they're honestly coming to the surface so that you can explore them. And as long as we don't go down the rabbit hole of numbing out and distracting ourselves to avoid this discomfort, it will actually pass so much more quickly if we look it in the eye and embrace it, accept it, and so much of us go through life full of guilt and shame and pain and suffering. And the truth is, you are the one. You are the one who can set yourself free. There is no other savior out there coming to set you free. You are the one you've been waiting for, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And, something I heard you say that I really want to touch on is like, when we are living in survival mode, okay, when we have experienced trauma we haven't dealt with and all we know is survival mode, there's something very physical that's happening within the brain that also keeps us very stuck. And what happens is these frontal lobes that are in charge of decision-making, logic, and planning are weakened. And this most primitive part of the brain where the fight or flight response lives and all those things are really activated. So we're living reactionary. Yeah. And that is why you're living in complete reactionary state. So this is why with my trauma recovery work, it's not like traditional talk therapy, which we're starting to see does not work because people are being forced to confront, but they're doing it in a dysregulated nervous system. And guess what's happening? Re-traumatization. So what's different about my trauma recovery coaching as opposed to traditional talk therapy, which again, does not work. It does not work. People that come to me have been in therapy often 7, 10, 12 years. Why? Why are we in therapy? Why are you spending 10 years of your life investing in something that's not working? But it's because so many therapists are not trauma informed, believe it or not. It's not something they teach. You have to go and specialize in trauma recovery work to be trauma informed as a therapist. And so in my coaching, the reason why I can do it in these 8-week programs and the women I work with see such amazing results is because we do not confront anything until we've done nervous system regulation. That is the first thing that we deal with is let's deal with the body. Let's learn to feel comfortable in the body, because what is healing if it's not ultimately feeling good in your body, thus good in your life, right? We're not disassociating anymore. We're coming into the body through somatic practices. We're learning about breath. We're coming back into our body and realizing our body is a safe place. Because for so many of us who have been abused, especially when there's an element of sexual abuse, you leave your body. Now that's a defense mechanism. If we did not have this defense mechanism, what would happen is that most people who experience severe trauma would literally have nervous breakdowns. They would possibly have heart attacks. It's against our survival. So the part of us that understands how to survive disconnects the body from the mind, the body, from the event. And when we have had repeated events that cause us to have to dissociate like that, we begin to live in that way. So many people who come to me, once again, they are so far removed from their experience, from their body, they don't even have the capacity to experience joy at that point because they're not an active participant. They're reactionary and they're completely separated. And so that is like one of the main keys of the work that I do, key points, I guess you could say, of the work I do, is we do not confront until we address nervous system first. And I will not move forward with the program until I feel like each client has, a good full toolbox of nervous system regulating techniques that they can call upon. And until they're aware, when do I need to use these? And that requires coming into the body and being that observer that we've talked about before of, oh, I feel my triggering. It's just this slight shift in the way I felt. So let me do some breath work. Let me remind myself. Let me give myself this 30-second hug and remind myself I'm safe. It's safe for me to be in my body. And then once we can regulate the nervous system, we can begin to confront as much as needed. However, I really do focus on a forward-facing way of dealing with trauma, meaning let's focus on the now and focus forward, because we can't change what's happened, right? We can't change what's happened, but what we can do is get you to a place where you're feeling really good, really right now, so that your future continues to unfold in ways that leave you feeling really, really good.
Yeah, ultimately, feeling really, really good is our intended state. And in fact, we're not taught these tools. We're not taught these resources. We're not taught how to create our own safety in our bodies, how to create space in our awareness so that we can choose intentionally how we respond versus reacting, from this flight or fight, freeze or fawn, whatever response that we're not thinking about. We're just reacting, right? But we can find freedom. We can create that safety within ourselves. We can learn how to shut some of that mind chatter and that spiral stuff down. That's obviously, that's what my book is all about, is really creating that space. Because when we can kind of come out of this space where we're not in control and it's not intentional or conscious thought, it's just a shitstorm up in your mind, but you can learn how to shut that down so that you can create space from which to act in an intentional way, right? A more conscious or more aware way, just having a little bit more information so that you can respond in the way that you would like to, as opposed to responding out of your past traumas. And we all have traumas, whether they be bigger or smaller. And the trauma is less to do, maybe a lot of small T traumas are less to do with the actual circumstance of what went down and how you interpreted that, how you experienced that, how you were able or not able to process and move through that, right? And this is what causes a lot of stuckness, is when we haven't looked at the thing because it's really uncomfortable. And hell yes, if I can avoid that discomfort as a human being, I'm in, right? Like that is our natural tendency to be like, what's good? This is not, I'm going to go over here. Let's just drink a bottle of wine and forget this shitty day ever happened. But that stops us short of the recovery process, right? We're not, as humans, meant to live in this stress response. And what happens when you don't move through and you don't process even these tiny, like, it could be a nothing thing that is creating a trauma response in you at this point, because it kind of snowballs, right? You leave these traumas unrecovered your entire life. All of a sudden, you're having a trauma response to things that don't warrant a trauma response, and you don't know how to shut it down. And it's just because this is a habit, it's a pattern, it's built in. Thank the Lord we can change that. Thank goodness, and also we don't have to wait for someone else to do that for us or circumstances to change. We have the power within us, which is quite magical.
Yeah.
Embracing all the parts of us, to me, is one of the major catalysts. This is like not like tolerating anything by any way, shape, or form, but it's accepting the situation the way it is or was, because that point allows you to move forward. When you don't allow yourself that acceptance and that grace, you can just ruminate and carry it with you. And then there's the shame stacking on top, and then the guilt about, and then the stories and the meanings and the judgments and all of these things that contribute to you feeling like crap. And that's not your intended state. Your intended state is to feel really good. So I would love to chat a little bit about shadow and how this ties in, because I know that as humans, we tend to avoid those parts of us that we don't, I don't know, you know, we've been taught are unfavorable, or we fear are unfavorable, taught by other people explicitly or implicitly, or experientially even, that that's not an okay part of you. And so we end up hiding it away. And I think so much of our responses when we're in this state of having hidden everything away is not reflective of our true authentic self. And then what happens is we miss out on being seen and heard and loved and accepted for our authentic being, because we're not presenting it. We're not giving the opportunity to truly be seen and heard and loved and accepted. And in my opinion, everyone deserves that. Absolutely everyone is worthy because you exist. You don't need to prove or earn your worth. You don't need to be valuable, quote unquote, valuable to society in that way to be worthy or to be loved. You know, there are really no rules to any of this. We are all kind of making it up as we go. And as we human, we kind of just figure out what works for us and what doesn't work for us. It took me about 40 years to figure out a lot of this good girl conditioning and how that impacted views of different parts of myself, and how I kind of tucked those away because they were maybe less valuable, less accepted. And I had definitely a lot of years of trying to measure up, trying to, you know, be what other people wanted me to be. And as soon as I started to really incorporate and embrace those parts of myself that I was afraid to show, that is when I really truly started to become someone who felt seen and felt heard and felt accepted. And in getting to that place, it deepened my own connection with myself.
Right. So, you know, I have several pillars within my trauma recovery work. And one of the main pillars is radical self-acceptance. That's something that me and my clients work through regardless, because it's something that almost all trauma survivors struggle with. And this is kind of how shadow work mixes into all of the work I do. Like all of it kind of blends together, regardless of what someone signs up for. We usually end up doing a little bit of all of it within there. But our shadow is a mixture of our past traumas, our ego, our inner child, and also our past shameful experiences that we hold shame around, or that we experienced embarrassment, especially as a child, around, and then created some type of belief system around this.
Yeah.
So our shadow makes up all of these different pieces, and it's extremely uncomfortable. And that's why, as you say, that radical self-acceptance piece is really the cornerstone to all shadow work, because it's about being able to look at these things and love them and love yourself in your fullness and your completeness, understanding you're not perfect, understanding that you have wounding, understanding that you have shame around some things. We all do. We all have skeletons in our closet.
We all do.
Right.
Yeah, we all have these bits we'd like to keep hidden if we could, right? And it's actually an illusion that that we're the only one, or that we have this terrible skeleton in the closet. But the truth is, we are very likely not the only one. We just feel that way because we're keeping it inside.
And we're worried about even looking at ourselves, much less what anyone else would think.
Right.
You know, and in addition to these things I named contained within the shadow, we also have our entire subconscious thinking, and that can vary depending on what conditioned thinking and limiting beliefs. And those are two very different things that have been created through your experience, and more so through your perception of your experience. And this is the perception of your experience outward, meaning your perception of what happens directly in your world, but also your perception of what's happening in your world outside of your personal experience. So what's actually happening in the world, and then how you're filtering that through the subconscious. And all of this creates a narrative. So we're only aware of about 5% of our thoughts. That is insane when you think about it. That's all we have awareness of. So 95% of the thoughts that we have on average, that's an average number, are being held in the subconscious mind. These are running narratives we have zero awareness of. And yet it's this 95 on average percent of hidden thoughts and hidden narrative that is creating 100% of the experience we're having right now. And that's why when so many people find themselves, as you say, stuck or in these patterns and cycles, and they're like, it's not me, I don't know what I'm doing, it's not me. It's that you don't realize it because you have zero awareness. So the whole shadow work concept not only deals with these hidden pieces that we're talking about, and we do so with love and kindness and self-compassion, but it's also about, let's go deeper. We've got to dig out these other things that are happening behind the scenes and bring them into the light. And I've actually created a really amazing process for doing this called mind mapping. Every single one of my clients goes through this mind mapping process. The best way that we can discover the quality of our subconscious narrative is through our emotions. And by tapping into our emotions, we can then notice, okay, I just shifted for some reason, or I was just triggered. I'm going to pause. Now, what exactly was I thinking? And you jot that down. This is what I was thinking. You do this for a week straight, and you have a blueprint of exactly what you need to work on, where your limiting beliefs lie, where your conditioning lies. And that really makes the basis for the entire program that I run with my trauma recovery. Because yes, there's a structure to it, but every person's needs are going to be individual. But with this blueprint, I'm able to look at that and make a tailored plan for my clients, looking at where their wounding lies, where the root of their wounding lies. But I think when we're talking about shadow, it's like most of the shadow is held in that subconscious place. So it's really about bringing awareness. And as we're bringing that awareness, you've got to do it with love. You can't look away. Yes, it's uncomfortable. But I always ask my clients this, and it's interesting, like as we have these fears, right? And anytime there's fear, just know it's from the ego. Simple as that. The ego works in fear because it thinks it's keeping us safe, which is why you hear all these things about kill the ego death. That's the last thing we want to do. The ego is our greatest teacher.
We need it to survive.
Right. And our greatest teacher, and provides us with so many lessons. And it's about loving your ego, loving your inner child, loving these things, unconditionally, because these are extensions of you. They're pieces of you. They're fragmented pieces, right? So it's all about, as we bring these subconscious things up, we're going to do so in love. And I always ask my clients, going back to what I was saying, when I see that they're struggling to face this, they're struggling to face that, I'll say, so let me ask you a question. Do you think that you're perfect? And without fail, every single person says, no, of course not. Nobody's perfect. Exactly. So why are you so hard on yourself for being an imperfect human being if logically you understand that you're not perfect, nor is anyone else? And yet you're so hard on yourself. Why? Right?
Yeah. It's a bit of a mind trip to connect those things though, right? Because we get so distracted and we're so busy seeking outside that we don't connect that inward connection, right? And we miss it. And so we're going out there, we're trying to be perfect, and we're making that mean that, oh my God, since nobody's perfect, we're like, well, not perfect. So obviously a colossal failure. Like this is what the ego does, right? And so it's really ultimately integrating that ego. We need it to stay alive. So yes, let's keep it on board. Let's keep it there. But let's also move out of survival so that that's not our first response, so that we can be more intentional with how we're responding, consciously choosing how we're going to show up, how we're going to be, how we're going to focus our thoughts and our feelings and our intentions and our actions, because they all flow together, right? And how we wish to create our experience of the world around us. Everything is going through that filter. Like as a human being, you have been through, couldn't even begin to guess the number of experiences you've had up until this moment here. Every single one of them is like a little tweak to your perspective, your perception. And so we're always putting our own bent on every experience. There is no way to not do that. And when you start to realize, oh, we're all just humans, we all see things slightly different because none of us have had the exact same experience, then we can really start to have a little bit more grace, right? For ourselves and for other people.
Others.
And when we bring all of that grace and compassion, it just really allows us to, develop stronger relationships, starting with that one with yourself. That's the foundation. Learning to love yourself is such a game changer.
Yeah. I mean, it's everything. You're absolutely right. And it's a huge part of the healing process, a huge piece, because every other relationship in your life reflects how you feel about yourself.
Yeah.
And it's true. And I know that can be triggering to hear, especially if you're in an unpleasant relationship or you feel like you're mistreated in the workplace or whatever it is. And it can be very triggering to hear, because the last thing we want to hear, and I don't like to use the word fault, but for no better word, that it's our fault that people are treating us a certain way.
Yeah. We love to take that approach, don't we, as humans? We like to just, and I think that also, just to tie this back to our childhood traumas, this is the response. It is a trauma response from childhood. As a child, when we're dependent on our parents, we end up oftentimes in this situation where either we're faced with this reality that either our parents aren't providing our every need. They can't, they're human. Or there's something wrong with us. And we go with, there's something wrong with us. We carry this shit through our entire lives, constantly, the filter is looking for what's wrong with us, because that is what we've been carrying.
So something really interesting about that is that the brain of a child cannot interpret that as being anything other than their fault. So for example, in the trauma recovery certification class that I took, the instructor, who was Eric Gentry, he is one of the leading experts on trauma recovery and forward-facing trauma care. And that's who I certified through one of his classes and whatever. But he shared a story, and it's, again, trigger warning here for everyone, because this does involve childhood abuse. But it was of a small child, 4 or 5 years old, who had been severely abused by her parents. And when everything came out and this little girl was being interviewed by police and psychologists and said, "Why do you think that your parents would do this to you?" And the little girl responded, "Because I'm bad." Now, the reason why is because at that age, there is literally no other way for the brain to work because of the developmental stage that it's at when these things happen in childhood. So it's not even that it's the easiest choice or that that's where it goes. It's like, that's the only place the brain can go. And then we carry that on, as you say. And from there, all kinds of stories are created around that.
Yeah. I mean, it's not a conscious choice. Our mind cannot possibly wrap itself around that our sole caregivers that are going to keep us alive are not going to be capable. Like, that's just not something that we can take on, right? Like, that would put our entire survival into question. So that's not really an option, right?
Exactly.
So yeah, thanks for sharing that a little bit of extra juice that just, puts the facts into a bit more perspective. I would love for you to share your offers as well as where listeners can get in touch with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start with where people can get in touch with me. My website is definitely the hub for everything. It's very, very easy. www.kellybramblett.com, first and last name.com. And from there, you will really find links to my podcast, to my coaching, to any events I have, my Facebook, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You'll find it all there. So that's really the best place to start if you're interested in learning more. Of course, I do have 3 books available. The first book is Alchemy of the Phoenix, and that book talks in detail about the story that I started our podcast with. Here's your podcast with talking about. It just goes into detail about that, and then it really goes into detail about the second part of that, which is the happier part, the healing part, the hopeful part, the part that reminds us that we can reconnect to joy no matter what we've experienced.
Yeah.
So that's a 2-part book. And then, of course, the shadow work book, the shadow work journal and guide for beginners. And then I also have an inner child work journal. All of these can be found anywhere books are sold. So those are also great resources as well. I share so many exercises in all 3 of those book practices. It really will fill your toolbox with any of those things. So I have all 3 of those books available. And now, as far as my offerings, I have a couple really exciting things coming up. One that I'm super excited about because this has been a long time in the works, a long time manifesting, which is my upcoming retreat. It is June 1st through the 4th in northern Colorado on beautiful, beautiful, beautiful piece of land backed right up against the National Forest, huge facility, lake on the facility. It is going to be amazing. And the name of this retreat is The Wisdom Within. It is a woman's retreat. I have been asked. It is for women. And we're really focusing on in this retreat, connecting to our own inner voice, connecting to our own intuition, and really just gaining that confidence in believing that we can trust what shows up for us and trust our own inner wisdom. So I am super excited about that, as I said. So that is one thing that I have coming up. If anyone's interested, please reach out to me. I will definitely get information for you. And then also a bit of a smaller project that I have coming up is my upcoming 7-week chakra membership program. And that is also in June. I want to say it begins June 8th, if I remember right after retreat, that following Monday after I get home from retreat. And this is all done virtually online. And we basically work with each of the 7 chakras, starting at the root chakra. I do several workshops. Within this program, we do all kinds of fun stuff. We make a chakra totem. We do womb work. I do a meditation that guides people to meeting their spirit guides. It's a little more woo-ish. And I mean, honestly, I'm pretty spiritual and pretty woo-woo. So it's in line with kind of everything that I encompass, I guess you could say. So that is happening, as I said, in June. I am signing women up for this now. It does happen in a private Facebook group. And the cool thing about this program is that all of the workshops that I hold, they're live streamed through the group. So you can watch them at your own convenience. And everything else is available in the files section. So every week you get a workbook. We do a workshop. And then every single day you have different journal prompts that are given to you, affirmations focused on that chakra. And all of this can be worked through at your own pace. So when you first begin, we kind of assess where you are at in your chakra center. So you already know going in where you need to focus. So say we get started and you realize, your sacral chakra needs more work. You can take 2 weeks and work with the sacral chakra and catch up when you're ready or continue at your own pace. So that's what's really beautiful about this program. And I do have early bird specials on that right now. It's just $99 to get in on that. It will be $144 starting in May, I believe is when I have that starting. So if this is something that interests you, you definitely want to jump on it, get in on this early bird pricing. And I also offer a Reiki session within this program as well. So you're also going to get a little energy work done at the end to anchor all the energetics work that we've done. So those are the 2 major things I have going on right now that I'm really, really looking forward to.
Incredible. And I think I just want to say, we have talked before the podcast previously about how science and spirituality are really coming together. And some of these, quote unquote woo-woo practices that people would think are some weird spiritual thing are actually getting scientific backing. And I, for one, am here for it. And I just wanted to throw that in there. I'm super excited for that. And I think that our perception is going to shift around what is considered woo-woo or spiritual as more science comes out to prove these things, like using your breath with intention, right? Or meditation, these kind of tools, tapping. They're all scientifically based. If you do a little bit of the legwork to look into where this is coming from, you will probably find some really amazing support from the scientific community. As I'm really here for it because I'm excited to learn more about how our brains work, how our bodies work, and how we can really honestly get that unity within. Mm-hmm. I would love for you to share with us one last idea, something that our audience can use today, something they can take away, put into practice real quick in order to start loving on that shadow a little bit more.
Yeah. So this is one of my favorite things. I love, love, love sharing tools, tricks, and all these things. So because I kind of did mention talking about nervous system regulation, and that's really the first step to any of this work, I will share, I'm going to take this weird little thing off that I wear. I will share a really easy practice that is, you can also find this in my inner child work journal. I share this one, but this is a really great practice. Anytime you're feeling stressed, anytime you're feeling reactionary, anytime you're feeling triggered, anytime you want to create a small pause to relax and calm the nervous system so you can bring all this frontal stuff back online.
Full capacity.
And make as we were talking about, responsive choice. So it's really easy. You can do it for just as little as 3 or 5 minutes. And it's called a butterfly hug. And I honestly cannot remember the name of the woman who invented this along the way. I apologize, I can't remember her name. You can easily Google butterfly hug and find this information as well. But this is such an easy practice. And so they call it butterfly hug because you kind of 2 thumbs together right here, hands like this, and you're just going to place these over your chest like this. And ideally, you want to have your feet on the ground so we're nice and grounded down, and you can let the eyes rest shut, start focusing on your breath, and just tap back and forth. Soft taps. And what this does is this mimics the sound of our mother's heartbeat when we were in the womb. So it triggers the brain to instantly relax, to instantly be comforted. And like I said, you can do this for as little as 3 minutes and see almost instant results in how you feel. And then again, like I was saying, get to a space of responsiveness, to create a little pause, a little space.
Yeah. I like to call that like safety first, but it's not construction safety, it's inner safety.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that lovely tip. And this has been, I think, a really informative discussion around trauma and shadow and ego and how to really integrate them instead of trying to run away from them. So thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your incredible story. I know that many people will be touched by that, and I'm so grateful for you.
Well, thank you for giving me the opportunity and this platform and space to share this story and a little bit of these things. I really appreciate it.
All right. I love you guys. Now let's go do some epic shit, shall we? If you're ready to go a little bit deeper and do the work for yourself, my book, Unstuck for Women, is going to help you to create your personalized spiral stopper using my spiral stopper method in order to shut down all that overthinking and overwhelm that have been keeping you stuck in your current patterns. I'm going to explain inside the book how your brain works and why it might not be currently helping you to accomplish your goals and how to change that. I'm also super excited to announce the upcoming launch of my brand new course, the Get the Fuck Unstuck Adventure. In this course, you are going to learn how to accept yourself as a whole-ass human, perfectly imperfect, just as you are. You'll discover how to free yourself from unnecessary pain and suffering. You'll learn how you can look and feel better in your body right now. You'll learn to understand yourself better in order to intentionally create the experiences you desire. And of course, you're going to learn how to stop merely surviving so you can finally start thriving. This adventure contains 21 perspective shifts that are going to take you from stuck in survival mode to consciously creating as your next level self. So join us, try on a few new perspectives, play with a few new possibilities, and become more intentional with your life. Registration is open, and the course kicks off on February 6th. If you haven't had a chance yet, be sure to head on over to my website at gtfu.ca for some sweet goodies and bonuses that are going to help you get the fuck unstuck, starting right now. Thank you so much for listening to today's show. I trust you were inspired to take back your power and create your happy. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share the show with women in your life who could use a little extra inspiration today. If you'd like to connect with myself and or today's guest, you can find those details in the show notes. We would love to hear from you. If you've got an inspiring story to share, you can also apply to be a guest on the show at createyourhappy.ca. As always, get out there, have fun, be you, and create your happy.